The wine glass in my hand was trembling slightly, and I wasn't sure if it was because of the cold November air coming through the gap in the patio door, or because of what my son-in-law had just said to me across the dinner table. "So you're still not working?" He didn't even look up from his plate when he said it. Just cut into his roast beef like he was asking about the weather. "What is it now? 2 years? 3?" My daughter stared at her fork. My grandson, 8 years old and too smart for his own good, looked back and forth between us like he was watching a tennis match. I set my wine glass down very carefully on the white tablecloth. 34 years as a forensic accountant with the Canada Revenue Agency will teach you a few things about staying calm under pressure. One of them is this: the person who speaks first usually loses. So I smiled. And I said nothing. He took that silence as permission to continue. "I'm just saying, Dad." He called me Dad. He had called me Dad since the wedding, which I always found odd because his own father was alive and well and living 40 minutes away in Guelph. At some point, a man needs something to do. Structure. Purpose. You know what I mean? What I knew in that moment was that my son-in-law had no idea who he was talking to. And I decided, quietly, over that roast beef dinner in my daughter's dining room in Oakville, that I was going to let him keep not knowing. For a little while longer, my name is not important. What's important is what happened in the 18 months between that dinner and the morning I sat across from a Crown attorney in a government building in Hamilton and handed over a banker's box full of documents that would change my daughter's life forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where this really started, not at that dinner table. Earlier than that, my wife Shirley passed away 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I will not dwell on that because this story is not about grief, and Shirley would have hated being turned into a sad detail in someone else's story. She was not a sad detail. She was the most competent person I have ever known, and I include my colleagues from the CRA in that assessment. She ran our house, raised our 2 children, completed her chartered accountant designation at night school while our daughter was in diapers, and never once complained about any of it. When she died, she left everything organized. Filed tax returns for the year, instructions for the garden, a letter to each of our kids. She did not, however, leave me any instructions for what to do when our son-in-law turned out to be a fraud. I retired from the CRA the year before Shirley died. 34 years. I had worked financial investigations for the last 19 of those years, which is a polite way of saying I spent nearly 2 decades figuring out where money went when people lied about it. I was good at it. I was very good at it. I will say that without apology because false modesty is a waste of everyone's time, and I am 67 years old and have no patience left for it. After Shirley died, my daughter, let's call her my daughter, because that's what she is and what she'll always be, asked if I wanted to move closer to them. She and my son-in-law had bought a house in Oakville, a nice street, good schools. My grandson was 4 at the time. I thought about it. I sold the house in Barrie, where Shirley and I had lived for 22 years, and I bought a small place about 3 kilometers from my daughter's house. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to pick up my grandson from school and teach him to play chess and be the kind of grandfather I'd always planned to be when I had time. My son-in-law's name is Bryce. He had worked in real estate development before he married my daughter. When I first met him, about 6 years ago now, I thought he was charming in that particular way that makes careful people slightly nervous. He had the right handshake, the right shoes, the right way of laughing at things that weren't quite funny enough to laugh at. My daughter was completely in love with him. Shirley liked him well enough. I reserve judgment. I am a careful man by nature and by profession. I reserved judgment for a long time. The first thing that bothered me, and I want to be precise here because precision matters, was not anything dramatic. It was a small thing. About 14 months after Shirley died, my daughter mentioned casually, over the phone, that they were thinking of refinancing the house. I asked a few questions. Normal father questions. What were the terms? What was the rate? Had they spoken to a mortgage broker? She said Bryce was handling it. She said it in the way people say things when they're not entirely comfortable, but have decided not to think about why. I let it go. It wasn't my business. The second thing happened at Christmas. My son was home from Vancouver. He works in marine engineering. Sensible boy, takes after his mother. And after dinner, when Bryce had had a few glasses of scotch, he started talking about an investment opportunity, a development project up near Collingwood. He was very excited about it. He kept using the phrase ground floor and equity position. And at one point he turned to me and said with real enthusiasm, "I keep telling my father-in-law he should get in on this. A man with your background, you'd see exactly why this is a sure thing." A sure thing. 34 years in financial investigations, and I've never once seen a sure thing. I smiled and said I'd think about it. My son caught my eye across the table and looked away quickly. After the holidays, I looked up the development company Bryce had mentioned. I did it the way I used to do things at the CRA, quietly, methodically, without announcing what I was doing. The company existed. It had a website, but the corporate registration was only 18 months old. The directors listed were a combination of names I'd never heard of, and a numbered company registered in Alberta, and a planned development site near Collingwood had an active zoning dispute that any competent search would have flagged immediately. I said nothing to my daughter. I did not have enough yet. And I was aware that I might be wrong. I was aware that I might be a recently widowed man looking for problems in places where there weren't any, because that is sometimes what grief does to a careful person. So I waited. I watched. I visited on Sundays for dinner. I drove my grandson to hockey practice on Tuesday mornings. I planted a small vegetable garden behind my house and grew tomatoes that were, if I am honest, not as good as Shirley's. Then came the dinner in November, the one I told you about at the beginning. The next morning, after I'd driven home and made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table in the dark for a while, I made a decision. I wasn't angry. Anger is not useful. What I was, if I am being honest, was tired of waiting for something to happen that I could already feel coming. The way you can feel weather changing before the sky shows it. I called an old colleague. We had worked together for 11 years at the CRA before she retired to do private consulting. Her name is Georgette, and she is the kind of woman who makes prosecutors nervous even when she's on their side. "I have something I want you to look at," I told her, informally, to start. "How bad?" she asked. "I don't know yet. That's why I'm calling you." What I had, at that point, was a general sense of wrongness and a very limited set of facts. The development company with thin registration. The refinancing my daughter had mentioned. A comment Bryce had made at Thanksgiving about having money tied up in a project that he couldn't discuss. Small things. The kind of things that mean nothing on their own and mean everything together. Over the next 6 weeks, I started paying closer attention to the things that were already visible to me. I didn't break any laws. I didn't access anything I didn't have a right to access. What I did was use my eyes and my training and 40 years of accumulated professional instinct. I noticed that Bryce's car, a lease he'd mentioned once, a package through his company, had changed twice in 2 years. I noticed that my daughter had started mentioning, in passing, small financial stresses. The roof needed work. They were thinking of pulling my grandson out of his hockey league because the fees were getting steep. She said it casually, the way she always said things she was embarrassed about. I noticed that Bryce's social media presence, and I am 67, not dead, I know how to look at a LinkedIn page, had shifted in the past year. The real estate development company he had co-founded, the one he'd told my daughter was thriving, had quietly removed him as a listed director sometime in the spring. I wrote all of this down in a notebook. I have been writing things down in notebooks for 34 years. Old habits. In January, I asked my daughter, very gently, how things were going. We were sitting in her kitchen while my grandson was upstairs doing homework. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Fine, things are fine." She said it the way Shirley used to say it when things were not fine at all, which meant I was right to be worried. "Is Bryce still involved with the Collingwood project?" I asked. She looked up. "Why?" "Just curious. He seemed excited about it at Christmas." He doesn't really talk to me about the business stuff, she said. And then, quietly, almost to herself, he says I wouldn't understand it. I held my coffee cup with both hands and said nothing. But I wrote that down in my notebook when I got home. Georgette, meanwhile, had found some things. Nothing we could take anywhere yet, but enough to confirm that my instincts weren't grief-talking. The Collingwood development had attracted complaints from at least 3 investors, 2 of whom had filed civil suits that were still winding through the court system. The numbered Alberta company connected to the directors had been dissolved, not simply wound down, which is a different thing and a meaningful one. There was more. Georgette had a contact at the Ontario Securities Commission who confirmed, off the record, that the company had been flagged for a preliminary review. Not charged. Flagged. This is going to get worse before it gets better, Georgette told me. I know, I said. Your daughter is going to be upset with you. I know that too. You're doing the right thing. I know, I said. That doesn't make it easier. In February, something happened that moved the timeline up considerably. My daughter called me on a Wednesday afternoon, which was unusual. She didn't sound right. Her voice was the way it gets when she's trying to hold something together from the inside. Dad, she said, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Did Bryce ever approach you about investing in his company? The development project? He mentioned it once. At Christmas last year. Why? A long pause. Someone called the house today, she said. A man I didn't recognize. He asked for Bryce, and when I said he wasn't home, he said he was trying to reach him about some overdue payments. And then he stopped and apologized, and said he'd try his cell. Another pause. He sounded scared, Dad. Not angry. Scared. I asked her if she still had the number. She did. Scared. I asked her if she still had the number. She did. I told her I'd look into it. I already knew what I was going to find. The man who had called was one of the civil complainants Georgette had flagged. He had invested, and this is the part that made my stomach tighten. He had invested on the basis of a presentation that listed, among the project principals, a financial advisory partner with 30 years of government experience in financial oversight. The description was of the person who sounded very much like me. I sat with that for a while. My name was not on any document. I checked. But the description was there, vague enough to be deniable and specific enough to be deliberate. Bryce had been using me, not my name. He was too careful for that, but my shadow, my credibility, the idea of me. I called Georgette back the same evening. We need to escalate this, I said. Agreed, she said. We went to a lawyer first, a good one, not my usual estate lawyer, but a litigator Georgette knew from her CRA days, a woman who worked out of a small firm in Burlington. Precise, methodical. The kind of professional who reads every word and trusts none of them. She listened to everything Georgette and I had put together and said, carefully, "This is a criminal matter. You understand that?" "Yes," I said. "Your son-in-law could face fraud charges." "I understand." My daughter's marriage is not my responsibility to protect," I said. "Her financial future is. And her son's." The lawyer looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded. We went to the RCMP with what we had, not the local detachment, the commercial crime section. I had contacts from my CRA years, people who understood financial investigation and didn't need the background explained to them. We brought the documentation Georgette had compiled, the connection to the numbered company, the investor complaints, the misrepresentation in the project materials. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not go to the RCMP to destroy Bryce. I did not go because of what he had said at that dinner table in November. I went because 3 months of careful looking had shown me that my daughter and my grandson were living in a house built on a financial structure that was already crumbling. And Bryce knew it, and he was not telling her. That is the part I could not forgive. Not the arrogance, not the condescension. People are arrogant. People are condescending. What I could not forgive was that he had looked at my daughter every single morning for years and let her believe things were fine while he knew they were not. I have stood in front of a lot of people in my professional life who had done a lot of things I found difficult to understand. But that particular kind of dishonesty, the kind that lives inside a marriage, inside a home, inside a family, that I found hard to be calm about. I was calm anyway, because calm is how you get things done. The investigation took 7 months. I will not pretend those 7 months were easy. My daughter knew something was happening. She didn't know what, not fully, not at first. Bryce became quieter, more watchful. There were 2 evenings where he called me, both times from a number I didn't recognize. Both times making small talk in that particular way that means the person is trying to figure out what you know. I was pleasant both times. I told him nothing. My grandson turned 9 in April. We had his party at my house because my daughters said the kitchen renovation was still ongoing. There was no kitchen renovation. I understood this later. But the party was good. We made homemade pizza and played floor hockey in the driveway, and I let him beat me at chess, which I don't usually do, but he was 9 and it was his birthday. And some things matter more than principle. He looked at me at one point, right before his dad arrived to pick him up, with that direct expression kids have when they're paying more attention than you think. "Grandpa," he said, "are you and Dad in a fight?" "No," I said. "Why do you ask?" He considered this. "You look at him different," he said. "Not mean, just different." I ruffled his hair and told him I was just getting old and my face was settling in one direction. In June, the RCMP executed search warrants at 2 addresses connected to the development company. Bryce was not arrested that day, but was interviewed for several hours. He came home, my daughter told me later, and sat in the kitchen for a long time without saying anything. Then he told her they needed to talk. She called me that evening. She was not crying, which I had expected. She was quiet, which is different and in some ways harder to hear. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since around January that it was serious," I said. "Since Christmas that something was wrong." A long pause. "Why didn't you tell me?" This is the question I had been preparing to answer for 6 months. "Because I didn't have enough to be certain," I said, "and because if I had told you what I suspected, you would have told him, and we would have lost the ability to find out the truth." "That's a very CRA answer, Dad." "Yes," I said. "I know." Another pause. "I'm not angry with you," she said finally. "I should probably be angry with you. I'm not. You might be later. Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "The house. Is the house? Are we going to lose the house?" "No," I said. And I meant it. One of the things I had made sure of, one of the conditions under which Georgette and I had proceeded the way we did, was that the civil side, the protection of the matrimonial assets, had been filed and secured before any of the rest of it became public. My daughter's equity in the house was documented and protected. It had taken our lawyer in Burlington 3 months of careful work, but it was done. "The house is yours," I said. "Whatever else happens." She let out a breath I think she had been holding for a long time. Bryce faced charges in September. Fraud over $5,000, multiple counts, misrepresentation to investors. The proceedings are still ongoing, as I write this. And I am not going to speculate about outcomes, because I spent 34 years understanding exactly how long these things take and why. What I can tell you is that my daughter is still in her house in Oakville. My grandson still has his room, his school, his hockey league. He is 10 now. He is learning to check his opponent's queen 2 moves before he loses it, which I consider a significant developmental milestone. My daughter and I have dinner on Sundays. Sometimes at her house, sometimes at mine. We don't talk about Bryce much. When we do, she is measured about it, hurt, certainly, and angry in a way she's still processing, but not destroyed. She is Shirley's daughter. She is not the kind of person who gets destroyed. There is one thing she said to me, about 3 weeks after the warrants were executed. We were sitting on my back porch in the early evening, the first cool night of what would become a long fall, and she had a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, and she said, "You smiled at Christmas when he said the thing about the sure thing. I remember you just smiled." "Yes," I said. "You already knew." "I suspected." She looked at me sideways. "Is there a difference?" "There is until there isn't," I said. "That's more or less how the whole job worked." She laughed, which was the first time I had heard her really laugh in several months. It sounded like Shirley a little, not because they sound the same, they don't, but because of what was underneath it. Something steady, something that hadn't been broken. I thought about the dinner in November, the wine glass, the roast beef, the silence after what he had said. I thought about driving home that night on the QEW with the lake somewhere in the dark to my left, thinking about what she would have told me to do. She would have told me to be careful. She would have told me to be careful. She would have told me to document everything. She would have told me that patience is not the same thing as inaction, and that the most important thing is not to make a move until you're ready to finish. She was always the smarter one. I was just the one who spent 34 years learning to listen to her. Some things you carry from a marriage that lasts long enough. Not grief, not loss. Something more useful than that. The clear, specific shape of the person you loved, pressed into the way you see the world, permanent as a watermark. When I'm not sure what to do, I still think about what Shirley would do. In this case, I think she would have done exactly what I did. And then she would have gone home and made a very good cup of tea and tended her tomatoes, and she would not have mentioned it again unless there was a reason to. I've been trying to grow better tomatoes. I'm getting there.